need to be able, specifically in FinTech and B2B, to explain things simply. We really emphasize the fact that we're fast. If you're going to send us your documents on a Monday, you're going to know a yes or a no in a week. You have companies that, I don't know, like have 100K dirham revenue, right? They don't really, it's not an interest in them. So the time that a bank would spend vetting the business and lending to them it's not worth the payback for them, the ROI on it, right? So they don't really cater to them. While for us, we're more efficient, fast, and accessible, so we can do it fast. It doesn't cost us as much if it's going to be a no in the end. When you have this demand or need, you just really need to focus on simplifying your message, simplifying your product, and really understanding your funnel.
Hi, Milda. Welcome to Below the Fold podcast.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's very exciting to have you here. Let's start with
Very exciting to be here.
I am very excited to be here. Let's give the viewers and the listeners a little bit of an intro about yourself.
So, my name is Milda. I am currently a head of marketing at Beehive, which is a peer-to-peer lending platform here in GCC. Personally, I mean, I'll just walk you through a little bit through my journey so far over the years. So basically, like you now, I should say, I started my career in Havas in an agency life. You know?
Okay.
So, I mean, I don't need to tell you this, but basically, when you live the agency life, you end up kind of knowing a little bit about a lot of different markets and about a lot of different
verticals.
Yeah. So you have to, right? Especially if you're in a creative role like I was, right? So I was working as assistant creative director really early in my career, which was a great opportunity, and also in like a household name, which is Havas, which was really, really great. But next to it, you know, at some point you start to question whether you will ever like deep dive into any kind of, or whether you were specialized in an area. So that made me kind of question whether this is really what I want, like how, and if I see my future going this way. So basically I moved to Europe, I moved to Lisbon, I moved to Portugal, and I started working for a private equity, right? Okay. So I was working in investor relations and kind of marketing management.
Yeah.
And it was really like a deeply financial role for somebody who's, you know, started with like creativity and agency life. It was a really like a big transition, because from what I see also like from my peers, et cetera, like making the transition from a financial corporate world to a creative one is much easier than the other way around, right? Like from a creative background to move to a more corporate financial role is a lot harder, right? Like there's a lot more things you need to pick up. It's a lot more longer hours. It's a very, very high pressure environment. So, and not really creative. I mean, it depends on which kind of company also you join, but basically it's not a very creative environment.
Right. It's interesting you say that, because most people would say that creative agencies and advertising agencies in general is where pressure is happening, is where it's fast paced. But you're saying the opposite.
Yeah. I mean, I guess in a way that the pressure and the pace comes in different ways. I think there's different kinds of pressures. In like finance, you really can't make any mistakes because it costs you a lot of money. There's a lot of money involved, even if you're one client, two clients, three clients, do you have subsidiary companies, et cetera, et cetera. So we were predominantly working with Brazilian and Colombian companies, right, that were predominantly timber focused. So there was a lot of people involved, a lot of money involved, right? Not to say that advertising doesn't have that. Obviously it does, right? Also depends on where you go. But the pressures are different.
There's a big trust element, right?
There's a big trust element. And I think maybe the creative component in the advertising agency gives you a little bit more breathing room, right? Versus like being in a corporate environment where it's really, really like it sucks the life out of you. But I'm sure like some creative people would say that about agencies.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So, and basically, as I said, I mean, like after working for a while for private equity or PE, it is like a highway to a burnout, which
Right.
also happened to me, right? Like
Yeah.
at some point I realized like this is not going well. I
Yeah.
feel really, really tired, really like depressed, borderline.
But did anything in particular inspire you to move from
Yeah, I mean,
well, first of all, from working at an agency
yeah,
to client side,
yeah,
right? And in particular, the finance world, right?
yeah. Um, I don't think it was particularly inspiration. I mean, this is a little bit. It was more like,
The
look,
stars
I
just aligned.
want to. That's one thing, and that's
Yeah.
really important in life,
Yeah.
right? Like the stars do need to align sometimes.
Right. Yeah.
But I think the most important bit was that I wanted to specialize in something.
Mm-hmm.
Like I wanted to find a niche. I didn't want to have a broad idea about a lot of different things. I wanted a niche. And personally as well, I wanted something that I really deeply understand, and know how to market, and can explain it in the middle of the night, rather than know a little bit about a lot of things, right?
Yep.
So that was the main motivator also to go in FinTech.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, it's an interesting segment and category, to choose,
Oh yeah.
especially with all the challenges that it brings when it comes to marketing, right?
Yeah.
In fintech or finserve or B2B, generally speaking.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But what would you say perhaps are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned or you've gained from your past experience, right? Moving B2B. Has it been rewarding?
I think there's an element of being in the right place at the right time. And I think fintechs in general in Europe, and kind of the Western world have picked up sooner than they were here in the GCC. But when I came here, it was still kind of mushrooming around, right? So you had a lot of opportunity, and you still do have a lot of opportunity here, right? So that's just one thing. In terms of biggest lessons throughout or so far, I would say, one of the things definitely that I've noticed throughout the companies that I work with, both, and we'll talk about this on the SME, so small and medium-sized businesses that I worked with, or whether it be equity or crowdfunding equity or peer-to-peer, I see a lot of like this fake complexity going around, like people, especially in startups, especially new companies, especially in marketing as well. You love to throw out concepts. We talked about this a little bit, like abbreviations and acronyms. People love acronyms, right? Like they love to throw around. And then what happens, and what I see happening a lot of the time, is that people go in a room, they have a meeting, everyone throws out their ideas, everyone is super happy, they go out and they understood different things, right?
Right, yeah.
Like we had this a little bit of a, we already had like a glimpse into this. Like you told me FinServe, and I was like, what is FinServe? And then I realized I know what you mean. I know what you mean financial services. But if we talk about fintech versus financial services, that's a whole podcast topic, right?
Yeah.
Because those are different things. Like financial services are at least what I understand with it, right, is banks, brokerages. So these kind of dinosaur older companies, versus fintech uses or combines a product and a service using technology, or essentially a creative, in a creative, innovative way, right?
Yeah.
So those are two slightly different, and the way you market it is different, right? But that's just like one example, and this happens all the time. So that's a really big lesson, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can already understand now the disparity and how we understand these acronyms. And I feel like you have more acronyms that have been hunting you.
No.
What else? What other acronyms have been?
I don't know. Maybe you know this as well. So you have a lot of this PLGs and SLGs, so product-led growth or sales-led growth, or no one really agrees on the CAC, for example. A lot of different themes, either it be in a company or just working with an agency, agree on different things what a CAC is, or understand different things. So what you'll find is, and the people don't really understand sometimes the core of what a problem is, or the principle of what it is, right? Because all of these are not just fancy names. there is a strategy and probably a very basic principle behind it.
Yeah.
And so I think what you will find if you start to unpack that is that a lot of people can't explain things simply, right? And that's kind of what I would say a big lesson is, and also a challenge at the same time, because you need to be able, specifically in fintech and B2B, to explain things simply, right?
I mean, I would imagine if I'm a startup and I sit with someone who's been a veteran in space and he starts throwing acronyms, PLG and SLG, I would not understand a word.
Yeah.
Like I would need to get the information broken down to me in terms that I understand. Do you think that's a challenge, financial literacy, for SMEs?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I'd like to be like careful because I don't want to offend. It's definitely not like the people are not illiterate financially, but I think what you would find is that a lot of people don't understand the core of what you're talking about, right? The core principle, and that's really what I'm getting at, right? In our space, or with Beehive, or with equity crowdfunding, the kind of the problem that you also see is that we live and breathe it, right? We live and breathe the products like WCF, TF, and we end up throwing them around, right? Assuming that other people, or people who have set up a business, let's say you would be set up a bakery or a coffee shop, would understand because they've had this coffee shop or whatever for 5 years, and of course they've run into some financial terms, right? But that's not really it, right? Do they really know what working capital is? Do they know what term finance is? Do they know what invoicing is? Like, if you would ask them, they'll probably explain like a broad concept or maybe something they grasp from the web, but not really what it is, right? And so that's why, I mean, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more, but that's why Beehive, is also kind of, if we want to categorize it, it is this kind of predominantly sales-led company, because you need like Gary, the sales guy, to come to you and explain what it is, right? So you're saying language barrier, or language or financial literacy is a barrier for all these companies to take on an opportunity, basically. I mean, right? A financial opportunity or growth opportunity, right? Ultimately. Yeah. I wouldn't say, like, it depends also on the maturity of the company, right? Like, companies that have been around, or like household names of Dubai for a year or two, or for like 10 years or something like this, they probably have encountered a need for debt or funding, right? So they have already some idea of what they're talking about. But you have like younger companies, right, over 2 years, who still are kind of, either they are doing really well and they want to expand, and then they're met with this language that is really hard to dig through, right? But on the other side, so we're at Beehive, we also onboard retail investors, right? And with this, you have to be extremely careful, because while there is a general trend of people investing in general their savings, right? Like, you have a lot of platforms that onboard retail investors, professional investors, angel investors, et cetera, right? But when we focus on retail investors, and I can't understate this enough, that you need to really be very careful of how you talk to them. This is where regulation comes in, and that's why we were licensed, et cetera, which it ultimately is meant to protect the investor, right? And this is also something about the terminology, right? Or how we talk to, what do we say to an investor? When do we assume that they know what we're talking about? When do we assume, or do they understand what even a return is? And this is not to say that people are not aware of it, but it's just that they make their own assumptions based on something that they've heard somewhere. And they don't really go into the intricacies of what is it going to be, what does it mean to me, and am I ready to take a risk with my money? Because ultimately, when you give money to a third party, whether it be your neighbor Gary or whoever, you take a risk. Yeah, I mean, this is what I wanted to also point out is, maybe as a business owner of a startup or an SME,
most likely have outsourced the financial management, I suppose, of my capital or working capital, right? Or the financial aspect or management of the company. And so I don't really need to get into the intricacies as long as I'm on the green.
Yeah.
Right. So is there maybe a need to also work with these third party financial services, right?
We don't
Or
really.
group of accountants maybe,
Yeah.
that handle these companies, these SMEs and startups?
I think a group of people that really understand how to, and this is something just on the side,
Yeah.
that really understand how to market financial products are investment bankers. Like those guys know what they're talking about. Like, I think if you take an investment banker out of the investment bank and put them in a fintech and tell them these are the products we market, they will know how to do it. They will know how to articulate it. They'll know how to articulate it to clients, right? I mean, obviously, every sales kind of type of person needs a little bit of a push from marketing, and there are touch points where you do need marketing integrated.
Yeah.
But largely, you would thrive.
Yeah, I
You
mean,
would
these guys
thrive with investment
have
bankers.
an incredible grip on money.
Yeah,
Right. They know exactly
exactly.
how to turn a dollar into
More dollars.
more dollars. I did not know which number to choose, which
Yeah.
multiplier, but yeah,
Yeah.
more
How
dollars,
many
I
zeros
guess.
are there?
How many zeros? Let's talk a little bit more about what you're doing today, right? Which is Beehive. Let's talk a little bit about Beehive, peer-to-peer lending
Yeah.
as well. Just to build some context before we attack B2B marketing. What do you say?
So, I mean, I'd like to start with taking a little bit of a step back, right? So, when we talk about peer-to-peer or equity crowdfunding, those are essentially two branches of the same tree, right? The general concept is crowdfunding, right? And crowdfunding is not a new concept by no means. Crowdfunding has been around since the Roman times. Back in the day, you would have a church or you would have a patron, right, who would facilitate or give money or fund an artist or whatever else. And thus the artist would give back to society or culture or whatever it is, right? So, and same goes with like if my neighbor Gary has a little car shop, right? And he wants to open another one. And I know this guy for years. And I'm like, okay, Gary, I'll give you the money to open the shop because I know he's a good guy. But do I really know Gary? What is it not to say that he'll just take off with my money tomorrow, right? I know he's been here, but do I really know him? And by the same token, you have Gary who wants to open his car shop, but he doesn't know what kind of conditions do you have when your neighbor Joe lends you the money or gives you the money or says, okay, I'll just invest, right, with whatever, I expect a return. So all of these things in terms of how the transaction is going to happen, what are the guarantees, what are the risks, are normally not clear in a setting where you actually physically peer-to-peer lend or invest money, right?
Yeah.
So that's basically the core concept of peer-to-peer, whether that be equity or whether that be peer-to-peer lending, right?
Yeah.
Which is the segment that Beehive essentially is in. So that's kind of the context of the crowdfunding. So what happened a while ago, it was like a few years ago now, I think like 25 years ago now, was the first platforms that facilitate these transactions started to appear, right? And essentially Beehive is just a platform. That's what it is. It basically facilitates transactions, right? So you have retail investors on one side. So one thing is like we have a multi-audience approach to even our marketing campaigns because we have two audiences we cater to, right?
Yeah.
So as I said, we have retail investors or professional investors on one side who earn returns based on the loans. And then you have SMEs who obviously and historically have a higher demand, or the products that Beehive offers has a higher demand because they have like a core need, right? They need the money or they want the money to expand, right? So essentially that's how it works. And we're the middleman, basically, facilitating the transactions, right?
Right.
The difference, and like an obvious question you would ask is, well, how's that different from a bank, right? Banks do that. Banks give money to small and medium-sized businesses or any business. Well, one thing is that banks are very slow, right? It's a very bureaucratic process. It's a slow process, very hard to understand. When are they going to get back to me? What kind of documents do I need, et cetera, right? And so at Beehive, we really emphasize the fact that we're fast, right? If you're going to send us your documents on a Monday, you're going to know a yes or a no, right, in a week.
Right.
Like, you're going to know this. If it's a no, it's going to be a no fast, right? And we'll give you a reason. We'll tell you, like, you need to work on this, your financials are a mess, or et cetera, et cetera. But essentially, what I'm getting at is the how you do it is really, really important. And obviously, like, a lot of tech companies will tell you this. Like, they do a lot of the same stuff that, let's say, more legacy companies do. But the how they do it, the interface, the technology, the digital approach is what matters in all of this, right? Which in return provides accessibility to SMEs, right? They feel included in the financial system. They don't have to go to a bank and basically kind of beg for a loan, which they don't know that they're going to get, right? And typically also, I mean, banks, they cater to larger companies. They prefer larger companies.
And they probably use the same process, you know, for large companies, scale-ups. And some banks do offer perhaps, you know, a startup program. SME program,
Yeah, they do. But again, it's, I don't know of a bank in the GCC that would say, yes, we're going to get back to you fast, where you are going to be included. You're going to be, your customer experience is going to be amazing. So that's why we don't really have a lot of competition in the GCC, right? Because if you would Google and try to find funding for your working capital or your expansion, or you want inventory, whatever it is you want, you would see Beehive as the first thing that pops up, because we're good at what we do.
Right. Yeah. Appreciate the description and the overview about Beehive. What do you think so today is the impact for SMEs, or the demand maybe for SMEs or startups when it comes to peer-to-peer lending, right?
Yeah. So I think there is a massive demand, definitely, because again, if you think about kind of SMEs, again, they have like a crucial need for something most of the time, right? We have SMEs that come to us that are repeating clients over 10 times, like businesses like Squat Wolf, for example, right? Or Augustus Media or Sportis, right? So these are brands that just keep coming to us because of the proven process. They've taken loans. We know them. Investors know them, right? So there is kind of this trust relationship already, right? So we have, I don't think that there's kind of, we're going to run out of SMEs at some point. One thing I also want to point out, like, we don't do startup funding, right? The one of the criteria that needs to be met is that the company needs to be at least 2 years operational and revenue generating, right? So you doesn't mean that you need to have a little bit of revenue, right? Like you don't it doesn't mean you need to be like the best company in the world, but we need to ensure that investors are going to get their money back, right? But again, just going back to your question, because of the banks not really catering to the lower segment or the mid-market, let's say, of the SMEs, where you have companies that, I don't know, like have 100K dirham revenue, right? They don't really, it's not an interest in them. So the time that a bank would spend vetting the business and lending to them is not, it's not worth the payback for them, the ROI on it, right? So they don't really cater to them. While for us, we're more efficient, fast, and accessible, so we can do it fast. It doesn't cost us as much if it's going to be a no in the end.
Yeah, I feel like agility
Definitely
has a big role to play,
Spot
right,
on.
in the entire process. And so are there any trust and risks that are sort of affiliated to P2P lending that you've seen that you're having to deal with, or no?
Yeah, I mean, from a business perspective, you always have a risk,
Yeah.
right? You always, as I said, I mean, if you're going to lend your money, right? Or if you're going to request money, if you want funding, there's always that risk of your company failing, right? You don't want it to happen. It can happen because of COVID or whatever, macroeconomics, whatever else, right? And on the investor side, I mean, this is where regulation, as I said, comes in, and I'm a big fan of that. Like, I know that a lot of founders and companies are like, oh, it's like you get a license and it's all a super painful process. I'm a fan of that process.
Yeah.
Because I think it basically what it does, it puts the consumer or customer in the spotlight, right? And it protects them, which is extremely, extremely important if you want to build a company, right?
Yeah.
And if you want to be around for the next 10, 15 years, if you want to IPO, whatever, you need to have these processes in place. Because if you're going to have a lot of people losing money, obviously you're not going to survive. It's really, really simple like that, right?
Yeah.
And on the other side, we have founders, CEOs, and entrepreneurs, right? Who are constantly looking for opportunities. So that's, I would say, like an easier audience to reach in general, because they're looking for you in a sense, right?
Yeah.
So when you have this demand or need, you just really need to focus on simplifying your message, simplifying your products, and really understanding your funnel, right? Like, if you're gonna, and one thing that is a little bit of a challenge, I think, in a lot of fintechs that are predominantly sales led, is that you're really good at converting leads, right? Like, if you have a contact person, they're interested, the sales guys are really, really good. They have like a blueprint of the steps they need to take in order to get that person converted or get them an answer, either it's a yes or a no, etc. But there's a lot that happens that normally is attributed to marketing before a lead or prospect comes in, right? That awareness kind of interest stage that is a lot more complicated than people make it out to be, right?
Yeah.
Because probably even if you're a retail investor or you're an SME, you probably heard something once, you didn't quite get it, then another time, and then, you kind of maybe read something more, or you saw a podcast or you saw a panel. So you kind of like slowly start to understand, but it's very hard to measure that ROI and those touch points, right? Versus like, sometimes I'm a little bit envious of product-led companies, because you essentially could, or a SaaS company, for example, you can send your prospective customer the demo version of something. Like, you can't send them a demo loan, right? Like, you can't walk them through the process, hence the sales guys, right?
Yeah.
But you can give them like an idea of how the whole process will look from top to bottom, and then ask them like, oh, are you happy with this interface? Are you happy with this? What should we improve? Like, we ask those questions, but they're normally like quite communication type of questions, right? To evaluate the process. And those are like feedback that normally leads into or feeds into the sales guys, right? Versus the marketing part.
Yeah. So before we get to engaging with SMEs, right, and the funnel over there, which I feel is going to be very interesting. You say it's easy. I mean, no doubt that you're probably doing a brilliant job to target these startups and SMEs.
Yeah,
I can
if
tell you
it's not easy, then probably must be doing something right.
You're definitely doing something right, because I can tell you it's not straightforward, right?
Yeah.
And we'll get to that, but let's talk a little bit about retail investors. How are you communicating today with retail investors?
Yeah.
Are you investing more on upper funnel, lower funnel? You said that there's already an existing, I guess, idea about Beehive. People already know or are familiar with Beehive.
Yeah. So I think what's happened with Beehive specifically in the last few years is, from this kind of product versus sales kind of mess, I would put it that way. We've clearly come out as a sales company, sales growth company, right? So if we talk about retail investors for a sales-led growth company, is a very sort of, as I said, it's a very competitive, very hard market to be in, because predominantly our competitors who would compete for the same audience, retail investors, have product-led companies.
Yeah.
So if you would like to sign up on Stashaway or whoever else, you go on a free trial, you put some money in, you see if it works for you, you opt out. It's easy, right? You don't spend a lot of time. And this is another factor that contributes to acquiring retail investors as well. How difficult is it going to be for me to sign up somewhere, right?
Yeah.
To start to invest, to be vetted, to agree on all the DFSA requirements, right? So there's not only this kind of what is a better product, but how much time and effort will I, as a person, as a customer, as a retail investor, will put into it in order to get a hang of investing, right?
Right. We go back to the concept of agility here from a retail investor perspective as well, right?
Yeah. But so the difference at Beehive is that we've started to acquire sort of partners, right? And partner up with also banks, right? Like recently we partnered up with ADCB. So they have, they basically have a lot of SMEs in their database that they don't cater to. They've rejected them because they're too small, right? Which is a database for our target audience, right? We don't have the same, we can't apply that same principle to retail investors, right? We can't really partner up with a database that have so much retail investors. There's massive competition there, right? For that database. So we are sort of not forced, but in order to scale up, we partner up with the likes of funds who go through a longer, rigorous process to sign a partnership with us, but then they allocate a larger sum on a monthly basis that we distribute through SMEs.
Okay. And then it's not, then it becomes more about inbound sort of marketing.
Exactly.
Than outbound.
Yeah.
Right? It's about brand equity. It's about strength.
Yeah.
And PR.
Definitely.
Right? And relationships.
It's a lot more corporate.
Yeah.
It becomes a lot more corporate.
Yeah.
But I mean, I see this with a lot of companies, though. It's a tricky one.
Yeah.
It's a tricky one because when you in the fintech world, you have a lot of product-like companies, so you really have to kind of not lose your identity. When you become a more corporate type of
sales,
partnership, sales,
yeah.
and in a kind of digital sense, what you see happening is that you have an interface or a platform that was essentially designed with the idea for retail investors to be onboarded and SMEs onboarded, and you have a marketplace that I see when companies switch or define themselves as a more sales-led company, they don't prioritize anymore the product, which is their platform. So what ends up happening is that you have this platform or interface that was built, and then time passed, and you piled stuff on top all the time based on regulations changing, based on new people coming in, based on technology, et cetera, et cetera. So at some point, the platforms and the interfaces become so messy and so hard to unravel. And at the end of the day, for the customer, it becomes sort of difficult to navigate them, that you almost need like a salesperson to go over there or give you a call and explain to you what the hell is happening there, right? And this is what I see. This is not like at Beehive, we had this problem, but previously I've seen companies deal with the same issue because at some point the management or the founder side, it is actually very expensive to just kind of just put a stop to it and start brand new and be like, okay, maybe a product-led approach might be expensive in the beginning, but it will pay off because it's obviously cheaper to have a product-led, like in a growth plan versus a sales
Yeah.
plan, because in sales you need to pay a person, right? You need to pay an actual salary to a person versus
And because experience matters, right? And you
Yeah.
want to retain your customer, you want them to come back, you want them to advocate for you.
yeah
Let's talk about SMEs now. And in simple terms, all right, for the audience of
Yeah.
Below the Fold, and the channels that they know and work with,
hmm
right? What's been working for you? What have you tested before? Is it search, or maybe
Yeah.
professional platforms like LinkedIn? Has social media worked for you? I mean, knowing how very probabilistic is the data over there.
Yeah.
Could
Yeah.
you maybe highlight what's been
Yeah.
working?
So one thing that definitely works for us is talking to the SMEs, right?
Mhm.
Putting the emphasis on the people that I don't want to use the word helped, because we didn't help them, right?
Yeah.
They deserved it. That's
Yeah.
their funding, right? But we basically put the spotlight on them.
Okay.
A lot of the initiatives, so that would be, let's say, we do a lot of videos, we do a lot of featured SME type of content, case
Yeah.
studies, and they normally are more than happy to engage with us,
Yeah.
right? Because they're happy to talk about their business, and we, as a rule, tell them you don't need to talk about Beehive, okay? We don't want to
Right.
be like, put a gun to your head and be like,
Mhm.
say the best things, like say this amazing things about Beehive. Like, we
Right.
don't want that, right?
Yeah.
We want them to talk authentically and see
Right.
if they see some benefit from Beehive or
Let-
not.
Yeah. Let's stop just on this point here.
hmm
And back to what we spoke about before we started recording,
Yeah.
which is on the video duration, right? And what works.
hmm
And the general assumption today in the marketing industry is that the shorter the
Shorter is better.
video, the higher the engagement, the more the effectiveness.
Yeah.
But you cannot fit in
Yeah.
a story about an SME in 15 seconds, can you?
No.
So you'll need more length. And so which platforms would work then for that? And how do you get people or your audience
Yeah.
to engage with this long form content?
I mean, this is a funny one, because I mean, that's no secret. People don't have attention spans,
Yeah.
right? So what we did to tackle this, like, I think Vogue
Yeah.
has this like 73 questions with Vogue or something like this.
Yeah.
And then you have like the celebrity, and you have a guy who's like essentially looks like is holding the camera, and he just asks these quick questions, and then the celebrity answers them. Obviously, it's really a kind of nice format, because you know the person and you would watch it because you want to see that celebrity like kind of casually
Yeah.
casually answering questions. So basically, this is the format of video that we also kind of stole from Vogue,
Yeah.
which is called 6 Questions with Beehive.
Yeah.
And so we would interview just SMEs, which started like a one cut, which was a huge challenge, because the single cut version was like, because not everybody is as good as
Right.
talking on camera,
Yeah.
and they get a little bit stiff, and then they start thinking about their shareholders and stuff. So it becomes like a more tense situation.
Yeah.
But you have some people, and it really depends on the founder, that are really, really comfortable. But the main idea behind this video and the format was that it's short, right? And while we do want to know about the business, we want to know about the person. So who do you want to be when you grew up, right? And what is your biggest achievement? And tell us quickly about this, or what is your favorite color? Like quick answers, which normally expand because founders love to talk.
Right.
But basically that's how we kind of tackle that problem of getting content squeezed into this few seconds in a kind of digestible format.
Right. So people are willing to engage with longer, perhaps, durations, provided that the content is compelling enough, right? You have a story to tell, and people will just engage if it's captivating and if it's compelling.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's a little bit of science to it, because I think people look for either of the 3 things. Either they want an educational piece of content, they want to be inspired, or they want to empathize, right?
Yeah.
So I think those 3 elements, if you can encompass that in whatever longer type of content you are doing, you have a good chance,
Yeah.
right? You have a good chance. I don't think that, if you want to kind of lecture people and like, no one's gonna search or listen to something or watch something that they're not interested in, obviously, right?
Yeah.
Seems like an obvious thing, but
Yeah.
when you actually are on the end of putting content out, you can sometimes forget the basic principles of it.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you're serving your video on a publisher about, let's say, financial literacy, for example, people spend more time there. They're dialed in. They're willing to learn more, right?
Yeah.
And maybe go through the entire video. And if you're serving your video on a TikTok feed, then you cannot expect
Oh no.
an engagement for longer than a couple of seconds.
I mean, apart from that being just like a social problem, which is like,
Yeah.
I do think obviously the medium matters, right?
Of course.
And you need to adjust the content that you're doing to the medium and vice versa, right? So that definitely is a big factor. It is a challenge for fintechs. If you're not doing kind of retail fintech stuff, right? Like if you're doing credit cards or you're doing like very, very like broad investment or investment platform, people I think largely know what it is, right? Like they understand the concepts of it. Obviously they can't say it back to you and explain it in intricacies, and some of them do, obviously, but most of the people understand.
Yeah.
When it comes to business funding, unless you're a business owner, it's hard, right? They will not be able to explain. Again, like conceptually, they might know what crowdfunding is, but they're not going to be able to explain what peer-to-peer is, what is working capital, what is term finance, what is revenue-based finance. Like those are concepts that they just don't know because they haven't encountered them, right? Unless, of course, they are a founder.
Yeah. So you need to first work on a sort of a hook to bring them in, and then you need to do this educational sort of piece, right?
Yeah, but that's what we struggle a bit with sometimes, because you have, again, like a social problem where
Yeah.
people don't like to read stuff. And I don't mean a blog post or an article, but really just go on a landing page and read like the subheading, for
Yeah.
example, right? So that becomes very limiting sometimes, because you really need to like get to the core of it, yeah, but next to it you can't really explain the product features, or you can't explain what kind of features you have. If you think about a customer who set up a business 18 months ago and this is the first encounter they have with like a platform, or just a person who's looking for a loan and they typed loan in Google and for whatever reason we popped up, or they went on the 5th page and saw something about loans, and they just applied for a form, right? And that often becomes a big problem for us, because you have a lot of people also applying for like personal loans. We have no idea how they got there. We often go back to like our campaigns. Is like the targeting correct, or have we done something, what or the key messaging is off, or there's something must be there that is giving them the wrong impression, right? And then often, or rather through optimization through time, we realize that kind of we are not the problem. The problem really is a kind of a social problem, right? People don't want to read. They don't really understand. They were just looking for something and they thought that this is the thing.
Right.
And that's basically one of the issues that we face.
Right. And you mentioned Google search, which is interesting. You mentioned that because I feel like there's also an opportunity to tap into people or SMEs or business owners who are actively looking for some form of lending, right?
Definitely.
And these are the moments basically that you need to chase, that you need to go after, versus someone who could be, in need of a loan, or lending, but isn't actively looking, is passive, right? Even though he's eligible, right? And for those actively seeking, right, what are the signals that you managed to identify, if you have? Because again, it's such a niche.
It's a niche
sort of audience,
very
right?
Niche.
Like I can imagine even search may not be helpful enough, is it though? Because because of, I guess, like you said, this challenge in people understanding, right, peer-to-peer lending and
Yeah,
differentiating that with other types of loans.
definitely. And you're spot on, right? It is a very niche audience you're looking for, because even if you're a business owner, and you also said this in the beginning of the podcast, like, oh, startup funding, like, this is one of the like, we don't do startup funding, right?
Yeah.
And so it's normal that you would assume that, because, well, like, you can't grasp the whole idea. It's extremely difficult to package it in a way that you understand fully, right? We do, like, we have different key messaging that we play and A/B test, and all of them have different problems, basically, right? And it's a tough one to sometimes figure out, but Google does work for us in terms of brand awareness, like, and then when we invest a little bit more money, let's say in Google specifically, with the campaign's objective being brand awareness versus conversion, then we see like a lot of WhatsApps, a lot of people are getting in touch with us. And again, this is something where maybe the user journey is not so important, because if you are looking for something, you're going to find a way to get in touch with that company, right? And obviously we have like phone numbers and WhatsApp, and all the channels are open every day. So it's not hard to find us, let's put it that way, right? So that's where the ease comes in. It's more about us getting the key message right, which often, gets lost a little bit in translation. LinkedIn, I mean, obviously LinkedIn in itself is a good tool, apart from it being, quite expensive. It is a good tool to market for us, because that's where basically our target audience is, right? All the founders and everything else. My personal approach to LinkedIn is it's getting like oversaturated with PR and inspirational quotes and snippets of that and this and events. So it's a lot of content. I think it's also because I'm getting older, so all my peers are like, instead of posting on Instagram their vacations, they just like switch to LinkedIn and start to post like their I don't know, uncle with dementia and how's that inspiring and stuff like that. So I think that's also like a sign of the times, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, also people want to talk about their views on, business and day-to-day work and achievements, and you're not gonna really do that on Instagram if you have LinkedIn.
People like to talk about their point of views, and sometimes I think, like, sometimes I look at companies, or maybe more like LinkedIn top voices and influencers, and then often I think like, wow, they have a lot to say. Like, I don't know this.
And I mean, LinkedIn is capitalizing on that, right? They have a format called Thought Leadership Ads, which is basically you're able to promote the post of an individual, right? It could be a top voice or not. It could be, the chief of a company. It could be a business owner. And you can just promote that. And one more thing about LinkedIn, there's the LinkedIn network as well. So if you don't want to, perhaps if you want to expand beyond the LinkedIn feed and you want to appear on other, websites and apps across the web, and you still want that LinkedIn sort of segmentation, you can do that with the LinkedIn network. They're also launching LinkedIn CTV in markets abroad.
I mean, as if there was not enough.
Not enough CTV.
There's not enough media. There's not enough media. It's like, and this is funny actually, because I think we can't tackle one thing, we're on to the next thing. It's just like, of course, like the company itself needs to, come up with new ideas, and I understand that from like from a medium standpoint, but from like this overflowing of information and really filtering through what is real and authentic instead of just fluff is so difficult.
100%. Let's move into the last area for today, which is the evolution, right, of the fintech / finserv landscape. Are there any trends that you foresee maybe in the next few years? Anything that could be influential on the landscape? Or
so from what I've sort of heard around, let's say going to conferences and talking to peers, I'm hearing a lot of this kind of trend or objective or growth objective for fintech companies to become kind of these horizontally expanded companies that offer so many different solutions. So if you would be a funding, if we would be Beehive, we'd pick up insurance and credit cards and this and that. So expand across product offerings, right? And become essentially these Kareems of the financial world, while you have a lot of different offerings going to the same app, or much like Revolut is doing right now, etc.
Yeah.
And for us, in my opinion, is that that's not the future. The future is actually going to be niche, right? It's going to be going vertically, right? So let's say, I think like a good example, and I'm sure somebody has mentioned this probably on your podcast, is like the Stanley Cup example, where you had like a borderline dying company that caters to men, picked up like a product by like some Utah living moms, right? Only because they could like bottle their water and hold it in their pinky while they're carrying their kids or whatever, right? So that's like a very, very interesting case
Example.
study. Yeah, because, and what you see there is really like why is it interesting? Because you have a small group of people that love the product, right? And so I want to somehow see this happen, or I think this would probably happen to majority of fintech companies as well. Like you will have some super app kind of type of situations, but what is going to be the future sort of for everybody else is to find that niche and find that group of people that for whatever reason really, really love you, right? And those essentially become kind of your brand ambassadors and your most trusted clients, right? That can, whatever, explain the USPs, or give like a word of mouth to your target audience.
You do have a growing number of SMEs.
Yeah.
Right. And this is a big market for SMEs today, right?
Yeah.
SMEs is they probably make up for what, 90% of an economy?
It's the majority of the economy.
Yeah.
And, right, they employ people as well, right? So you have huge opportunity.
Yeah.
But the point about the vertical versus horizontal is that you will have some companies that are going to be these super companies, but that's a very small percentage of the fintechs that will be able to involve in that level. Very, very small, right? Because majority of the fintech companies will sort of be forced to do that, because what you see if you want to pick a ride or you want to pick a digital bank, you have like 3 options, and they compete with each other, right? Versus if you want to go, like, if you have a very specific need, right, you probably have 1 or 2 to choose from, right? So it's less competitive, right? It's also slightly cheaper because you can really invest in your products and really go into intricacies of things versus like kind of lose the focus of the company.
And I think this is where at the end of the day, there's a sales approach as well, right? That you need to account for. There's a relationship that you need to build, and you need to personalize your product. You need to make sure that you are after a certain niche and you are doing it, properly. Right. And what about some of the, I guess, rising technologies out there? I mean, obviously there's blockchain that's been that
tossed around for a couple of years now.
I was trying to find the right word, but I feel like tossed around is the right one. There's that, there's blockchain, there's AI, obviously. Do you think these will have an impact on the fintech FinServe industry?
I mean, like, predominantly AI, right? And this is no secret, this is widely known. Like, for example, we recently integrated AI in our credit screening process. So for example, you have documents, you have a company, you have a revenue documents, but whatever else, you would submit your financial information. So we would run it through our AI in engine, and if the engine would find anomalies, let's say in revenue or spikes or anything else, it would ask you automatically questions like, what happened here, right? So it does help us, and it is something that is slowly being integrated in different ways, right? I think there's a lot of companies that are way ahead of us. But I think AI is the future in an operational sense.
Yeah.
I mean, that's no secret. Like most marketers use ChatGPT or whatever else, or even more complicated copy or image platforms to generate their images because of efficiency, largely because of efficiency. I don't think a lot of people think it's because of laziness or not wanting to think about things more creative, but it's not that. I think people just want to make their life more efficient, and AI really caters to that, right?
Yeah.
I think what is going to do, though, what becomes more apparent even now, and this comes back to like LinkedIn and this overflow information, you need to be, if you're going to use AI for whatever it is, what kind of content you're producing, you need to be happy with the quality. Like and what you see, there's a lot of kind of garbage content right now out because all is AI generated, right?
Yeah.
And either somebody didn't take their sweet time to edit it, or they didn't, for whatever reason, maybe a human reason, or because of laziness or whatever, they didn't, right? So it becomes like the baseline of the content that is out there is kind of bad, right? The quality is not there. Versus you can see people who are kind of pushing the boundary with using AI. It doesn't mean that you don't use it. It just means that you edit and re-edit and to the point that you're happy with the quality of work that you produce.
Right. And I can also see the value on creating that agility, right? And like you said at the beginning, in identifying whether there are certain spikes in the data that some of these, I guess, SMEs, submit, right? To ask the right questions,
right?
Definitely. As opposed to, having to scan and read through
manually, like a person going through the document. So it's again about efficiency, right? And so that's definitely AI is going to play a huge role in that. I don't have the opinion that it's going to take all our jobs and all of us are going to be jobless in 10 years. Like, no. That's not going to happen. It's just different. The roles are going to change. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, no. Me neither. Yeah. I mean, I think we've covered a lot of grounds.
Good.
Today. Yeah. Any parting words, Milda?
No, I mean, it was great to talk to you.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for inviting me here.
Yeah, you're most welcome. Welcome again. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
You too.